There are moments in life when everything finally lines up. The record deal is signed. The music is finished. The future has an address. For a young artist in America, that moment usually comes after years of waiting, years of rejection, years of hoping the phone will ring one more time. When it finally does, most people believe the danger is over. But sometimes, the danger is only changing its shape. In the early 1990s, the music industry was searching for new voices. Smooth voices, honest voices, young men who could carry emotion without shouting. One of those voices came from a place most executives never visited, a neighborhood where success did not guarantee safety. He had already made it out once. He had already been noticed. He was already planning the next chapter. And yet, one ordinary night erased all of it. This is not a story about what he did wrong. It is a story about what happens when timing, environment, and history collide. Because in America, talent can open doors, but it does not always close the ones behind you. And when the past is still waiting outside, the future does not always get a chance to walk in. Before the contracts, before the studio lights, there was a small house in Massachusetts filled with routine and responsibility. He was the youngest of 6 children, growing up in a family where work came first and dreams came second. His father left early each morning for construction jobs. His mother worked long hours as a nurse's aide. There was no room for fantasy, but there was structure. And there was church. Faith shaped his early life. The building, the silence, the sound of voices rising together. That was where he learned control. Not volume, not performance. Control. Singing was not about attention. It was about feeling. He did not announce his talent. He carried it quietly. For years, his family did not fully understand what he had. Until one holiday gathering, when he stood and sang without warning. The room changed. Conversations stopped. Grown adults wiped tears away without knowing why. That moment was not applause. It was recognition. Outside the home, life felt different. Brockton did not offer many exits. Violence was common. Drugs were visible. Trouble was not something you searched for. It found you. Music became a place to hide and a reason to stay alive. He listened closely to the artists who had already made it out. Michael Jackson, Prince, Marvin Gaye, Sam Cooke, and especially New Edition. Proof that someone from nearby streets could reach far beyond them. At 12 years old, he found a local studio and a mentor who believed discipline mattered as much as talent. The studio became a refuge. He learned how to shape his voice, how to listen, how to understand that success attracts attention from people who do not want to see you win. But the streets did not pause while his voice developed. Arrests followed him through adolescence. Mistakes stacked quickly. By his mid-teens, school was no longer an option. He was expelled after a fight and eventually dropped out. For many, that would have been the end of the story. For him, it became a deadline. He told his parents he needed out. Out of Brockton. Out of the cycle that swallowed young men before they could decide who they wanted to be. He went to New York chasing meetings, introductions, and chance encounters. Nothing guaranteed. Just movement. That persistence worked. He met a manager who saw potential instead of problems. Someone willing to take the risk. In 1989, he signed his first record deal. The album came and went quietly. Little promotion. No protection. No guidance. He learned early that the industry does not reward hope. It rewards leverage. And at that point, he had not found his yet. Momentum does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, after people have already stopped watching. After the first album faded without impact, he did not argue with the outcome. He studied it. He learned what it meant to be young, talented, and unprotected in an industry that moves quickly and forgets even faster. He understood that another chance would only come if he was ready when it did. That chance arrived through a relationship that felt more personal than professional. Someone older, someone respected, someone who moved comfortably between the streets and the business world. For the first time, he felt guided instead of managed. This connection led him to a label executive who recognized the sound immediately. New Jack Swing was no longer experimental. It was defining the era. The industry needed artists who felt authentic inside that sound. Not flashy, not forced, grounded. She believed he was ready. The deal that followed was not symbolic. It was serious. Multiple albums. Real investment. Expectations that went beyond a single record. For a young artist who had grown up counting exits instead of opportunities, it felt unreal. He took the advice seriously. He moved away from his old neighborhood. not to erase his past, but to survive long enough to build a future. In the studio, his focus deepened. He wrote most of his material himself. He was no longer trying to impress. He was trying to be understood. When the album was released in the summer of 1991, the difference was clear. Radio stations played the singles. The charts responded. One song held its position week after week. Another climbed steadily. Fans connected to the restraint in his delivery. The emotion felt lived in, not borrowed. Touring followed. Industry conversations changed. His name began to circulate as part of the next generation. Not hype, momentum. Yet success did not change his instincts. While others embraced celebrity culture, he remained cautious. He avoided industry scenes. He returned home often. Familiar streets felt safer than unfamiliar rooms full of strangers. Fame brought visibility, but not comfort. That decision carried weight. Because attention does not always arrive alone. It brings resentment, suspicion, old tensions that feel reactivated by progress. To some, his rise looked like abandonment. To others, it looked like power. He was standing at the edge of something stable. But stability requires distance. And distance was the one thing he struggled to maintain. Success does not erase history. It only makes it visible. Even after he moved away, the past followed him quietly. Not in headlines. In glances. In conversations that stopped when he entered a room. In resentment that did not announce itself. The streets had their own memory, and memory does not negotiate. There were signs that things were tightening. Arguments that did not end cleanly. Tensions that lingered longer than they should have. Violence had already touched his family. One cousin killed. Another shot. Loss had become familiar long before it became personal. Still, he kept moving forward. The label was behind him. The next album was already being discussed. A trip to Atlanta was scheduled. Studio time was waiting. Structure was finally replacing chaos. He believed he could manage both worlds long enough to finish the transition. Then came a night that felt ordinary. He stopped by his mother's home. Nothing dramatic. Nothing planned. Later, he sat in his car with his cousin. Music played softly. Conversation drifted. Familiar comfort lowered their guard. The street looked the same as it always had. Until it didn't. A gunshot broke the stillness. Then another. Then many more. The car became a target before anyone could react. Men dressed in dark clothing fired repeatedly into the vehicle. There was no warning. No exchange. No chance to run. He moved instinctively. Toward his cousin. Using his body as cover. When the shooting ended, the damage was clear. The car was riddled with bullets. He had been hit multiple times. He was taken to the hospital. He did not leave. He was 19 years old. The cousin beside him survived without injury. In the aftermath, the language used to describe him shifted quickly. Police emphasized his record. Reporters repeated allegations. Progress was framed as temporary. Change was treated as suspicious. The narrative felt familiar to families who had seen this pattern before. His family spoke differently. They spoke about intention, about direction, about a young man actively trying to leave one life for another. They questioned why the area had not been protected, why violence had been allowed to grow unchecked. On the street, another version circulated, that the shooters may not have known who was in the car, that the windows were tinted, that the attack was reckless, not targeted, that death arrived through confusion, not calculation. None of those explanations brought him back. A week later, hundreds gathered to say goodbye. The industry paused briefly. The neighborhood mourned deeply. Another future ended before it could defend itself. The rise had been real. The fall was final. In America, tragedy is often processed through paperwork before it is processed through empathy. After his death, the system moved into position. Police reports, court documents, statements written in careful language. The case became a file. His life became context. Publicly, the conversation focused less on what was lost and more on what could be explained away. His past followed him into the headlines, even though his future had barely begun. The idea that someone could be changing was treated as uncertain. The idea that violence could interrupt progress was treated as normal. Within the justice system, accountability eventually came. Arrests were made. Trials followed. Sentences were handed down. Years later, parole hearings quietly reopened old wounds. From a legal standpoint, the process concluded. From a human standpoint, it never does. For many Americans, especially those who grew up in similar neighborhoods, the story felt painfully familiar. a young black artist navigating two worlds without enough protection from either, watched closely by law enforcement, expected to succeed without making mistakes, judged harshly when the past resurfaced. In the music industry, there was a different kind of silence. Executives understood what had been lost, but the machine did not stop. New voices replaced unfinished ones. The era moved forward without waiting for grief. Outside the United States, his story barely reached the surface. No international headlines. No global conversation. That absence revealed something uncomfortable. How many lives end before they are ever introduced to the world? How many careers are remembered only by those who were close enough to hear them in time? Years later, his music still circulates quietly, not as a movement, not as a revival, but as evidence that he was here, that he mattered, that the system did not have the final word on his value. America is skilled at moving on, but moving on does not mean understanding. Not every legacy is built on longevity. Some are built on direction. He did not have decades to refine his sound. He did not have time to outgrow his mistakes in public or reinvent himself for a new era. What he had was momentum. And momentum tells us who someone was becoming, not who they used to be. Today, his music still appears in quiet places. Late-night radio, old-school mixes, digital playlists curated by people who remember how the early 90s felt. The songs do not sound unfinished. They sound restrained, controlled, honest in a way that cannot be taught. That matters, because it means the talent was real, the growth was real, and the future that never arrived was not imaginary. For his family, remembrance is not about fame. It is about correction. Correcting the idea that a person is frozen at their worst moment. Correcting the narrative that progress only counts after it is complete. They speak of a young man actively choosing differently, learning, adjusting, trying to survive long enough to mature. In the broader culture, his story functions quietly, not as a warning shouted from a podium, but as a reminder whispered between generations. Talent alone does not neutralize danger. Opportunity does not automatically bring safety. And leaving a life behind is not an event. It is a process that requires protection, patience, and time. He was running out of time, not because he lacked discipline, but because the margin for error was never generous. Some stories end without closure, without redemption arcs, without a final chapter that feels complete. But dignity does not need a long timeline to exist. If this story made you pause, consider why. Consider how many voices you never got the chance to hear grow older. Share your thoughts below. Someone else may be carrying a similar memory. And if stories like this matter to you, stay with us. Subscribe, not for nostalgia, but for perspective. Some lives end early, but meaning is not measured in years.